All right, guys, so what the hell is the difference between doing this and a skull crusher? Always seems to kind of be a little bit of a hot topic. I'm not really sure why, as far as, anytime someone sees a cable or it's crossed, it's overcomplicated or unnecessary or whatever. And I just want to highlight first and foremost the similarities between this exercise and the skull crusher, and how they both bring pretty much a lot of the same stuff to the table, and then really discuss the one thing that's different about them, and then kind of get into a teeny bit of nuance with that, and you can kind of make your own training decision. Because the reality is, with every exercise or comparing two exercises, when people are very dismissive and say terms that aren't quantitative, they say things that are qualitative, realize that's not a reason, right? Because people will say things like, this is overcomplicated, that's neat, or like, this is old school and it's better, like, that's neat. Your body doesn't understand that stuff. Your body understands, really it's physics. It's force being applied to your body. How does that affect your body? And I don't think understanding stuff is a bad thing. And again, they're both great options. They're both amazing exercises. So where are they similar? They take your upper arm loaded through pretty much the exact same range of motion. So near full elbow flexion, most people are stopping here. You do a skull crusher, you stop about here. Same thing on this one, you stop about here. So maybe not overloading full elbow flexion, but a lot of range of motion through where your triceps are very strong, near the lengthened position, through the mid-range, and pretty much almost all the way to full extension. So one, same range of motion is covered. The loading pattern is almost exactly the same as well too, which is great. The way we have the cable set here, now again, you get a little bit more versatility with cables as far as loading pattern, I won't get into that, but the way I have them set is to really overload that midpoint, so it's still very heavy in the more lengthened, overloading the midpoint. And as I come to full extension, you'll see that cable drops closer to the elbow joint. It's basically getting lighter as far as my triceps are concerned. The weight stays the same, but the moment arm to that elbow joint gets shorter. So basically there's a drop off. It is less torque at my elbow, less tension for my triceps to have to handle. The exact same thing happens with a skull crusher. So if I'm lying on a bench, where my forearm is basically parallel to the ground is where there's the most joint torque. And as I come to the top, everyone's experienced this. If you go all the way up when you're on a skull crusher to the point where it's right over top of your elbow, then there's no tension, basically no torque on the tricep. So most people, if you have it right here, you can keep tension on all the way to the top. So loading pattern is the same. If you're on a bench doing the cables and you're on a bench doing a skull crusher, the bracing is the same. So you really don't have any limit from output. So what is the difference is alignment. Now, how big of a deal is this alignment thing? In my opinion, if you're going to be doing this for a while, it's a big deal. Now again, no one cares about qualifications just to sound arbitrarily smart, but I can honestly say that I have done skull crushers consistently, progressively, with an easy bar, with a straight bar for over a decade. So I have my experience, personal experience of having done skull crushers, and I've done cable variations for over a decade. And I've done cable variations for over a decade after kind of wrecking my elbows from doing the skull crusher variation. So again, it's a hinge joint. You want that line of force lining up right through that elbow. If you're doing skull crushers and you cannot have your upper arm in a plane that is perpendicular to the ground, just realize it's not aligning the same way. It's not aligning with that hinge joint. It's basically going to be going, instead of straight through the hinge joint, some sort of torsion-y force, for lack of a better word. Now that's the whole deal. So that's the difference. If you're doing a skull crusher and you are incapable of getting them in here, especially with that fully pronated or near fully pronated grip, meaning they just flare out, or if you're like Terrence, they flare out a lot, then it's just not going to line up, and that force isn't basically going straight through the hinge joint, like I said. So the things you should consider for that is, does that mean if you're that person, you should never do these? If you don't have a very long lifting career, it probably doesn't matter. If you're training triceps once a week with one exercise, it probably doesn't matter. It's one of those things for sure where the devil is in the dose. If you're a bodybuilder, a meathead, you're basically trying to get your arms as huge as possible, your triceps as huge as possible, so you're basically throwing as much direct work at them as you can tolerate, and you're gonna do this for a long time, it probably matters. Now again, are there gonna be exceptions to this? Yes, I always use the example. My great-grandpa is one of those guys that literally smoked from, I believe, age 8 until he was like 88. And so that would be an example of, see, it doesn't matter, smoking's not bad for you. You could point at somebody like Michael Hearn and say, look, he does skull crushes however the hell he does. Michael Hearn, whatever his joints are made of, whatever joints are made of from Krypton, because he's not a human. So are there gonna be people that are exceptions where, man, I've been doing skull crushers for 30, 40 years, they have giant triceps, everything feels great? Sure. Are you that person? I don't know. So anyway, when you're choosing between the two, realize the exercises are both awesome. They both have a lot more similar than they have different. But realize alignment is that big thing, the big difference. And again, you can't argue that. The alignment is going to be drastically different. If you can have this cable lining up right through your upper arm, you see how that cable lined up when I went through it, it's going to line up better as far as hinge joints are arguably designed to tolerate a lot of load. Now again, really the decision's up to you is how much does that matter? Should I do table cross? Consider some of those things that I thought about. And again, don't necessarily look at it as good or bad, right or wrong. Just to consider the differences between the two, individual dependent, and make your own educated decision. And try and steer away from arbitrary words of, this is just overcomplicated, this is old school and it's awesome, and this is blah, 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 whatever. Because again, that's not a good reason to necessarily make gym decisions, or especially prescribe gym decisions if you're a coach or a trainer.